Welcome back to another episode of Adventures in Machine Learning. I'm one of your hosts, Michael Burke, and I do data engineering and machine learning at Databricks. I'm joined by my co-host,
Ben Wilson. I spend my mornings figuring out why React won't build with Node Package Manager
at Databricks.
at Databricks. Yeah.
Cool. Today we are speaking with Artem. He is currently the Chief Product Officer at Semblian AI, a tool that records, transcribes, and generates smart meeting summaries. And it's really fast and cool. You guys should check it out. But more importantly, Artem was a guest in episode 110. So if you're curious to hear more about the fundamentals of startups and the basics of the Sembly product, give it a listen. So Artem, how has the past year been? What have you been up to?
Hey guys, great to be back. It's been a very busy year. It's hard to think through all the things that happen in the year because in our world, every week is a lifetime. And so it's been exciting. There's been a lot of new things happening in technology, in the market, in the AI industry as a whole. And so we've been both keeping up and setting the pace at the same time, if that's possible.
Yeah, I can imagine this industry is just becoming more and more saturated. What are the players that you're seeing are emerging? How do you guys sit? Are you comfortable with that market position?
So when we talked a year ago, this idea of meeting assistance and note-taking automation, this was a pretty new idea still, and it was in the process of companies becoming comfortable with the idea. And at the time, something I would say often is that what we're seeing today are the baby versions of these companies, including our own, in terms of the value that they're offering to their customers. Because at the time, large language models like GPT were still fairly new. And companies were trying to capture that low-hanging fruit as fast as possible. So there were some very obvious use cases. There were also low barriers use cases in terms of market entry and in terms of technical implementation. And so a lot of products similar to ours, there's different flavors of kind of what a meeting assistant was, developed very similar features. And so we actually had an abundance of new tools and products from all kinds of different areas that were all kind of trying to do similar things. And so that was last year. And so we went from a place where we were one of like very, very few companies, if any, that were working on understanding the information in the meeting and presenting something valuable after that, to being one of like dozens that was trying to do something like this. Because of the background that we had and because of the many years of working on it, we were one of the leaders in the pack. And that was great. And so in that area, we did very well. Some companies took a little bit more of a, let's say, a populist angle. We took more of a deeper, kind of larger organization angle. But generally, we were a leader in that space and still are, because when you're talking about doing this at scale, internationally, compliantly, with consent, with privacy, with security, you start to shave away a lot of these other smaller competitors, and you only are left with a few products that can do what we do. But a lot has changed in the past year, and we're very much evolving as a product. And so if we were kind of a baby in this space a year ago, we're now like getting up to toddler, and we're starting to show signs of very distinct differentiation from some of the other companies in the market. So that's kind of where we are today.
How do you think about integrating yourself with like video calling platforms that already have a large customer base where they could just sort of create or even like buy a service like you? Are you looking to sell to those services? Are you looking to sell direct to consumer? What's the model when these large organizations already have a lot of your user base?
So we ride on top of conference platforms, and one of our hallmarks is that we have a proprietary tech that emulates a meeting attendee very effectively. And so we're less of an add-on into like a conference platform, and we're more like a virtual participant. I, there's so many ways of kind of attacking the meeting content problem because that data is so valuable and it can be used in so many different ways. And so you have companies that are trying to build something internal to try to do some things very narrow with that data set. You have companies that are trying to like API themselves into meetings and then do something with that. For the very large companies, so like, okay, Microsoft Teams is making a lot of inroads in this direction. It's difficult for them to bring very sharp, very deep value features into that platform. They can do basic things, like they can do meeting recording, transcribe, and maybe ask basic questions of the meeting. But it's very difficult to step outside of that and start to take into considerations the historical flow of meetings, the team structure, individual goals of people in those meetings. Now you're starting to get into the business side of things. And so for Microsoft Teams, that a product that appeals to like over 200 million users a month, that's a difficult reach. So we've talked with companies about acquisitions. We didn't yet find an acquisition. We haven't run into, let's say, an acquisition partner that we felt was a good fit for us. That might happen in the future. I don't discount anything. But right now we're really focused just building a really fantastic product that's doing something that no one else is doing and bringing monstrous value to the teams that use it.
I'm really curious about the disruptor market. When you're an established leader in an area that's using technology that everybody is really excited about, or they think it's really simple to just, I could just use Gen AI to solve this problem, and it should be simple. Like I can write some scripts that kind of do this. How often do you see one of these small startup disruptors that are trying to edge into the space coming up with a novel idea that you're like, we should really think about doing that? And what's the process that you follow for evaluating ideas that other people are establishing?
We see ideas that we like all the time. I don't shy away from. Our goal is not to be the one that comes up with the idea. It just often happens that way. But if we see a great idea from a competitor or an upstart, we will think about, how would this make sense in our world, and if we love it, we'll roadmap it. For the really kind of small, like niche startups that try to get in, I'm a big fan of them doing that, because the more players you have in and around this kind of technology, the more normalized it becomes. And so just by participating in the ecosystem and talking to people and getting some early customers, they're helping to spread the word of this new layer of products that has come into being, which is the AI-powered layer of products. So that's a good thing. Typically, it's very difficult for early stage companies to serve organizations. So what they end up doing is they end up serving individuals. So there was a great example, an old friend of mine, his name is Josh Moore. He was one of the Uber first 50. He was the New York general manager for Uber, like in the first couple of years that Uber started. So he recently, you can say, kind of came out of retirement in a way, and decided to write his own app called some Wave, I believe. And the app is eerily similar to in concept to what Sembly does. And he knew about Sembly when we just kicked off. So I'll take some credit for that idea as well. And so the app is entirely iOS, and it records your phone calls and gives you a nice transcript of the phone call. That's it. That's all it does. Super simple. And he's in 4 months, he's been able to reach like, 1 million ARR. And he's not a coder, and he solo coded this for iOS. I think that's fantastic. It's not our target user base. Like we don't do like personal phone calls. We don't do kind of like consumer stuff. Like if you're a freelance professional, our product is great for you, but not really for individual calls, and not on the mobile phone. Like it's just an iOS interface. There's no other interface. So the early stage companies, they'll tackle a part of the market that is not our target. And so we're not concerned about them kind of like eating into our space, but I think it's great that they're adding to the information. And then when we do see a feature or a use case or an experience from a competitor that we like, we definitely think about it. We also often see new things from competitors that we don't agree with, and we love to see those too, because that tells us they're going in a direction we don't believe in. And it's kind of like, let's see whose dragon is stronger, to bring back a term here.
I mean, just the zeitgeist that you get from a tool like that on the iOS store. I mean, like imagine all those people that are using that are also, they're just like, man, I've got this app on my phone that does this thing that I love. Why don't I have this at work? I'm going to go talk to some people. And then people are like, actually, we found this service that does that for us. Yeah. And it just, here's the monthly subscription cost. Let's just get that. So yeah, it seems like it's super beneficial.
Exactly. And sorry, guys, apologies. There's heavy rain outside. Are you okay with my audio, or should I go and close some doors? I just wanted to do a little mic check. You're good?
Can't hear anything. Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah.
Awesome, amazing. It's like going crazy. But that's so the microphone is doing something really good. All right.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a really interesting meta concept of people being resistant to sharing their data, and this is like a theoretically invasive concept where there's a thing listening to you, right? And do you think that fully leaning into this, publicizing all of your data, is required, and where do you draw the line?
All your data, probably not. But I think the further along we go, the more value we will find in sharing more and more data, especially from your work activity. So first of all, we draw kind of a dotted line there, and I would say there's data around what you do in your personal life, and then there's data that's related to your work life. I understand in some cases there may be sort of a blurred boundary, and that's a special case that needs to be considered individually. But in those situations where that boundary is natural or organic, I think those are two very different data sets. And so personally, I would be sensitive to anyone capturing data from my personal life. It's for what I do. It's like how I want to spend my weekend. But from a work perspective, I think we'll probably, like, my sense is that we're going to go in a direction where most of content that's work related, interactions, chats, video, any artifacts or anything like that you produce will all be kind of compiled and subject to data collection, because there's so much power in using that content to create great outcomes for the business.
Ben, where do you draw the line?
I mean, I'm as far from a Luddite as you can get when it comes to stuff like this. So anything that I do at work, or anything that I do on my work computer, I consider fair game. Like, I know that there's abilities for data collection, both internally at the company, like legal could get access to the stuff. I'm fine with that. So in the back of my mind, I know, like, if there's something that I don't want, a whole bunch of people reading that I have no idea that they're reading it or who they are, I'm just not gonna enter it onto my keyboard, or just certainly not discuss it in a meeting that's being recorded or that's not being recorded. So with that mindset, I welcome, that invasiveness, because in my current role, having an assistant that can help out with stuff that's discussed in meetings and making sure that notes are updated and that there's a transcript that other people can read, or a summarization of important things that were happening. I'm looking forward to the day where I can discuss stuff in a meeting and then have some advanced AI agent that's understanding, like, what my calendar is, what my Jira board looks like, what my quarter, roadmap planning is, what my capacity is for the team, what current state is of things, and to have it start generating, probabilities associated with prioritization of things that need to get done at certain points. I think the more integration and with that data in advanced tools that can do that, the better. It saves us from doing all of the annoying context switching that we have to do day to day in a workplace environment.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. All right. So question for Artem on the more like technical side. What are the technologies that you guys are leveraging that allow innovation? Where are you guys placing your bets? What are the types of models, if you can speak to that? What are the types of software stacks? Those types of things.
Agents. So we are in the past year, that's been our big bet. And actually, so the previous question very naturally brings us to this one, which is, I look at kind of the modern AI stack, where the LLM is at the bottom of the stack, from where I'm looking. Right, I understand there's a lot more in there. And I call that the substrate, which is, it's kind of the raw material. And then there's the method, which is separate from the substrate. And the method is how you use the substrate. And one way to use it is to like ask a factual question, or just ask a question like you do with ChatGPT, and you'll get back an answer. That's one method, right? Like Q&A. But then there are much more advanced methods of using the substrate. And that's where agents come in. I kind of have my own perspective on what I consider an agent. So to me, an agent is a technology that can continue to interact with one or more substrates, as well as other content sources and other agents, to get to a result that it's looking for. And so that's what we've been working on for the better part of the last year. During this time, we dropped an automations component into our product that's very robust. And we can now, for example, so Ben mentioned, like, it'd be cool if you can pull Jira and Calendar. So our automations allow us to connect natively to dozens of endpoint applications, task management, CRM, knowledge management, many, including Jira, and send information to those applications. That's what we do today, and we do that well. Like, we can send transcript, notes, tasks, etc., and we do that well. But we're actually positioning for something much bigger, and in just a few weeks, and we already have a web page about this, we're coming out with what's called Semblian 2.0. And Semblian 2.0 is the the first time the world will meet what our agentic technology can do. And so we use the agentic methods. Some are simpler, some are more complex. So like, for example, on the simpler side, like an agentic method could be, it generates some result. It thinks about, what's good and bad about this result, and then it improves the result as a result of its own assessment. And that assessment can be done by like similar LLMs or different LLMs or a custom trained LLM. So that assessment piece can be varied a lot. But that's typically called reflection, right? And so you can use reflection to get to a level of quality of answer. But then we use a lot of other kinds of methods that are sort of user experience specific to get to other kinds of results. So what Semblian, something we talked about with you guys on the previous podcast, is this idea that you're kind of by showing up in your meetings, we have this ability to digital twin you, because essentially we know when you're speaking and we know what you're saying, and we understand so much. People are very surprised how much we can figure out about you, but when you think about it, when you're talking to ChatGPT, you can ask it like with 2 sentences, and it can give you like really relevant stuff. But with Sembly, you're talking for hours in all different kinds of contexts, so we know a lot about you. So we're basically now have a product that understands you very well, understands you deeply, and understands your work deeply. And so one of the features of Semblian 2.0 is that after a meeting, it figures out who you are, who the participants are, what companies, like what business, what's the goal. And so it understands kind of your vector coming out of a meeting, your individual vector, meaning like what do you want to take out of that meeting? What are you responsible for out of that meeting? And it will give you high impact suggestions on the most valuable things to do as a result of the meeting. So for instance, like let's say you're a PM, like a product manager, and you just came out of a meeting with your team. It may say, okay, like based on this discussion, it looks like there's a need for like a feature requirements document. And nobody could have even said the word feature requirements or feature requirements document in the meeting. But because it's able to figure out deeply contextually what this meeting was about, related back to prior meetings, it's able to give you this really powerful response. And the way we do that is we use agent workflow behind that.
Super cool. Ben, I think you requested this either on the prior episode or another episode. It's really ringing a bell, but that's super cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think is a good first stage for a tool that I'm looking for, like selfishly in my day-to-day, is exactly what you just explained, where it gives us like that summary as almost an application that I can go into. And it's like, hey, it looks like we need a product requirements doc to be written based on this conversation. Would you like me to generate one for you that you can then review, and I'll assist you with like a chat interface on, you highlight some text, you write a sentence about what you want changed, it modifies that so that it can conceptually get, that very valuable work item that needs to get done, that takes a lot of time and that I don't have, to generate this stuff, to provide context to people that need to do the next phase of something. And if those people are not in that meeting, providing that summary of what was discussed, as well as a formalized document and the set of tasks that are the next actions. So like, okay, we know that person A is going to be the one doing the engineering design document based on this product requirement. I'm going to create a JIRA task for them. I'm going to look at the complexity of the PRD, and I'm going to estimate the number of story points that are required in JIRA to do that engineering design based on their historic performance of completions of those. If it can go and fetch their previous designs that they've done and then what the JIRA was that was associated with that, to say, okay, it was a half point and they got this done. They've done this 30 times. They're probably pretty good at this. So maybe this is 0.25 points or 0.75, depending on the complexity. And then to have that in that summary to say, I can click a button that's like, yep, create JIRA. Like that, we're talking about saving person years of time in any company that this, like a system like this is in. It's like a no-brainer. I would not see, if it works really, really well, I don't see a company that wouldn't jump all over this. Anybody who's producing software is going to definitely be on board with this.
So Ben, you described the second major feature in Semblian 2.0. So next to those insights, it says, so it gives the insight, like based on, like what it's going to say, something like there's something in this discussion that suggests that a PRD needs to be created. Then it says next steps, like do this, this, and this. And then it says the deliverable, a project requirements document or something like that. And then there's a little button next to it that says work on this. And you click the button, it opens up a ChatGPT-ish interface. And the insight already appears as in your chat. It's associated intelligently with content that you have access to from all your prior meetings. Not yet associated with all the integration stuff we have access to. So not yet conversational with Jira, but we already have that connect, so we'll make it happen. And then you can either ask it a question like, what's a project requirements document, right? For example. Or you can say, yeah, this deliverable sounds great. Go ahead and make it in English or whatever, or just make it. And if it thinks you're asking for an artifact, it will generate the artifact. And it will generate it contextually hyper-specific to all of those details that we have about you, not just from that one meeting, but from all the meetings that could possibly be related to this. And that's also part of an agentic workflow that happens. And it generates the document with all the details that are available to it from all the conversations you've had. So it's a full-on document that you can download in Word and PDF. And in chat, you can say, actually, can you add like a summary section like towards the end that talks about something? And it will add that section to that document in chat. And then you can download the new version. And then you download it, and then you mess with it however you want, and then you send it to your team or attach it to your next meeting invite, do whatever you want. And you can, and it's really good at anything that's like information worker type document, like anything that would be good in a Word or a PDF. So we don't yet, and we don't have any near-term plans to do things like spreadsheets, not really images, like I'll think about it, but so far not really. But anything that's like a spec or a project plan or a contract agreement or a compliance document or I mean, like, there's so many possibilities. It's really, really good at.
I'm wondering what the cold start is. So if I sign up today, right, assuming, or whatever 2.0 releases, new users to the platform, haven't had the agents on meetings, doesn't really understand me. How long before it transitions from cold start behavior to being uncanny valley of like, I think this is an actual human sort of thing, but there's some things that are not, it doesn't quite get, to all the way being mature enough to be as trusted as like an actual human assistant that's very good at all of those tasks?
I don't think it's a 0 or 1 type situation. The more it hangs out with you, the smarter it gets. So there's another piece to Semblian called work streams. It looks like we're actually going to delay the release of that piece, but it's actually fascinating. So what Workstreams does is it takes the entire flow of your meetings and distills them into like contextual related things. So like essentially, if you're working on like a few projects, it will figure out that those are the projects you're working on automatically. Or if you're working with like talking to 10 customers, it'll figure out like these are your customers, and it will relate information across meetings to those work streams. And so that feature takes about 5 days to come online once you start using Sembly. So I don't know if that gives you an idea of maybe like the minimal kind of time, but that's what we found is like you need about 5 days of regular daily meeting stuff for this to start to be interesting. And then it continues to build over time.
That's actually that's a lot shorter than I thought it was going to be, which is pretty cool. Yeah. So how much do you think this is going to be, proliferated throughout industry? Aside from, enterprise focused, basically job helper, which is basically what this is, like the ultimate job helper. Do you see stuff like this being within the next, say, 2 to 3 years more present in just general human life? Like the principles that your team has worked on about leveraging, agentic workflows and the power that these things, provided that you're doing it in a controlled, safe, sophisticated manner of like, hey, I want you to do this thing, and here's how to do this thing, and here's some controls around it that you create. Do you see stuff like this being, more readily available just in general everyday life?
I'll say like this. I think the barrier will be compliance. And I think that will be ultimately the only barrier, because once you touch this and you understand what it can do for you, you wouldn't want to live without it, because it's like what you said. It's like, who loves writing from scratch, like specification documents or contract agreements? Like, who loves to do that from scratch? Like, nobody. You want to make it good. You want to use your expertise. You want to like, make it like infuse it with your wherewithal and adjust for nuances. But you don't want to be sitting there like, okay, like page 1. Like nobody wants to do that for a 10, 20, whatever page document. If you told me like, okay, I'm going to give you an analyst who's going to work with you, and whenever you have a document, like the analyst will be, or an associate, let's say an associate, right, a little bit more senior. The associate will be smart enough that they can produce like a decent draft, like that's actually very complete. Like it's not final. Like you have more expertise. You're much more in tune with exactly how things need to be put together, what to look out for. So this associate is going to give you like the 80%, 90% complete artifact. And then you just go in and like you kind of put in your little flavor on it, but then you're done. Who would say no to that? Like, I spent time working. Yeah, I spent time working in management consulting. I was an associate. I was a VP at EY. I was a senior manager for a time. That's like, that work is like very, like that's the hard work. Like that's the work you need to like grind. Why grind if you don't have to?
I can imagine this revolutionizing the project management space for consulting quite a bit. Where you're like, hey, we sat on this 3-hour call that we talked about all these requirements, and at the end we agreed on a final list of things that we will do, and here's a bunch of stuff we won't do, and creating an actual contract document out of that breaks out work streams and estimates, person week associated with task. Yeah, that would save you a bunch of time, right, Michael?
It would. It most definitely would. No, it's a no-brainer in so many different facets. I had a question for you, Artem, though. Well, like 70, but I guess this one I'll start with. You said compliance will be the primary/only barrier. What are the risks with this tech?
Many, really many. It's not something that should be taken lightly for companies that for whom controlling internal information and communication is a critical piece of their business. Listen, if you're running like a lemonade store, zero risks. You should be using it yesterday. But if you are Ernest and Young, or there's things you need to think about. If you're a weapons manufacturer, or there's many situations where it's very, very sensitive. And so the proliferation of information could be sensitive. Using these artifacts as is without a human review, let's say in the legal space, that opens up some risks, because these things are good, but they're not human yet. So they need a human to go in and I had a great example where we're in the process of getting our HIPAA certification, and we have to BAA our subprocessors. BAA is a document that talks about how your subprocessors can treat like health-related personal information and things like that. And when I use Semblian to help me generate the BAA, and like for whatever reason, it decided to indemnify the subprocessor. And that's that you can, like, you need to be human to be like, why are we indemnifying the subprocessor in this situation? Like, who wins here? Right? So I think those are risks. It's proliferation. It's like legal risk. You still need you need good controls over how your data is managed, and you need also good controls to make sure that you don't just take whatever AI spits out and make it into something that will hold someone liable, or legally liable for something.
I found that even for like somewhat trivial use cases where got a bunch of, like Michael, we were talking before this meeting together about multi-turn agents and some of the tests that we've done with those. When you apply it to something like, oh, I want to write like a demo, or I want to do something for documentation for this project, and I don't want to sit and write 4 pages of text about this thing. And with multi-turn agents, you get it so that it's like, okay, I'm actually storing the source code in a vector index, so we can go and find the exact code that it should be referencing, and also a copy of our existing documentation that can search for items in there. And then we have a whole bunch of agents that are going and doing different roles, and including one agent that's capable of just executing generated code and validating that it's producing what it's supposed to be producing, and then a code reviewer, and having it generate documentation. It removes my own personal bias from the editorial process, which I find incredibly powerful. So I'm getting an additional reviewer for free in myself, because I'm not the one producing it. When I read through something that I've written, I'm kind of glossing over it. I miss a lot of things. I think most people do, unless you do the whole like, oh, I'm going to write it on Monday and then I'm going to review it on Wednesday after I've dumped this from short-term memory. And then I'm going to look and be like, why did I write that? Like, that's not right. Or that's really confusing. Okay, let me edit it again. But having, Gen AI generate something for me, it's like somebody else on the team wrote it, and I'm basically doing a review of that and pointing out things that are like, I would not do or say this, or this is highly confusing. And I can make edits to that so that my first actual draft that goes out for peer review is so much better than if I had written it myself. But yeah, if you just trust what these things generate, no matter how sophisticated like multi-turn agents are, if that nuance that's in there, you're like, well, that's not really a public API, or we don't really want that to be used, even though that does work. There's a different way to do it. If you just trust it and ship it, yeah, you can get into a position where you're like, all right, we just effectively shipped a regression, or we did something that is going to break the user experience. So yeah, I'm a believer of using them, but I just wanted to point out that sort of psychological effect is pretty cool, in my opinion.
Yeah. Another question for you, Artem. You guys are sitting on a gold mine of data, as you alluded to. You're starting to leverage that gold mine to build context and sort of a digital twin about a user, then hopefully leverage business context, Jira context, all this other context to then give tasks and actual deliverables. What's the 5-year vision with this data? There's a lot that can be done with it.
Our goal has remained steady since founding, which is we want to help teams get to their results faster, better, cheaper, get better results. Our motto is flawless execution. And I think that's our North Star, and that won't change. So we're going to continue to develop things that let teams accomplish things in the most powerful way enabled by AI. I was talking to a customer this week, and we were demoing Semblian 2.0, and they were trying to come up with an analogy of what it is, and I'm like, well, it's not like a separate teammate, but it's more like anyone who's enabled with Semblian 2.0 kind of has the Iron Man suit on. It's kind of like that, and I think this is a good way, and we call it also the whole kind of spiel we call augmented worker intelligence, not just separate pure AI, but we take the worker and we empower them with superpowers based on AI. And that perspective is important. And so 5 years, 5 years, we're now at a point where we can start to sort of leapfrog you across the time consuming parts of your day. And, next year we'll be able to do that even better and broader, because we'll start to potentially add all the connected apps into that process. But then you go out 3-4 years, what I think will happen is a lot more proactivity. The better we know you, the better we understand what you're trying to do, the more we can help you and not wait for you to tap us to help you. So it becomes if it's an Iron Man suit today, maybe in several years, it's a lot more like a Pikachu, where it's sort of it knows what you're trying to drive to, and it's okay, I already lined these artifacts up for you, and do you want me to publish them like that, right? So it's going to become more proactive. It's going to, and it's in an interesting, in a way, there's a lot of new things, but in a way it's very aligned, which is the deeper it knows you, the deeper it understands the work you're doing, the more it's able to help you with more kinds of things. So more accurate results, more different kinds of results, but all towards getting you, helping you to accomplish what it is that you're accomplishing. I'll add something else to this. Another kind of angle that we've been thinking about, it's not for near term, but it is something that might come into play over the next few years, is there's also a question of alignment, but not alignment from in the AI world alignment, but alignment in the business world alignment. So as we get more and more proactive, and as our technology becomes more and more influential in the results that you're working on, so consider we're already giving you most impactful suggestions, but we can actually align those suggestions to strategic directions. And so we can align the suggested things that we recommend, but we can also then align the work that this Pikachu does to the strategy of the company. And so this is a way to kind of create a very responsive nervous system. And I hate the term because it's so overused, but agility in larger organizations, where, today, like something bites like a large company, like, a year later, it might respond. But with this kind of system, something bites you, like the next week, all the impactful things are aligned to address the bite. And that, I think, is also a very powerful idea.
Cool. That's super cool.
I do have one thing that I'm thinking about with if it's possible, or if it already does this in the 2.0 release, as a sort of pre-send feature, where like, hey, I'm writing a draft of an email that's going to go to a VP that's talking about a proposal that we have, or some issue that's happening. And if everybody at a company is using these tools, is using Assembly AI, and there's nothing stopping the system that's working for you or your agents from understanding the history of what happened with similar interfaces with this person that needs to approve this, and then stopping you from making a proposal that could rub them the wrong way or focus on the wrong things. Could you get a system, or is it capable of saying, Ben, you don't really want to phrase it this way. Here's something that's like, let me rewrite this for you with some suggestions, and you'll have a higher probability of, getting this message across more effectively to this person. They like information presented in this way, and they have less issues with things that are presented in this way. Like maybe this VP likes just the TLDR. They don't want any detail information. They want, here's the actions that I want to get approval to do, and one sentence explanation for why. And then another VP at the company is like, I want to know all the nitty gritty details. I expect, full explanation of everything, or maybe sensitive ways of actually interacting with them. Like some people might want to hear the bad news first, or the problem statement first, and then a solution right away. Other ones want to hear like a discussion effectively. Is there, like, question one is, does that exist? And question two would be, is this something that you would shy away from if it doesn't exist? Being like, I don't know how intrusive something like that would be.
Fascinating idea. Does not exist. The intrusiveness is important. There's a lot of access concerns when you can start to use information from someone else's activity to empower your activity. So for example, in Semblian 2.0, one of the big challenges was creating a layer that's semi-permeable, where you can chat with the work stream that you're participating on, and other people on your team, or even other teams might be participating on, but you wouldn't have access to any content that didn't occur on a meeting that you have access to or attended.
Right.
And that's a little tough to do. With something like this, it would have to be in like a very nuanced way, like what information about another person are other people able to infer? Like, can they use the preferred communication style of this other person in whatever they're trying to do? So I think there's an information sharing and potentially a privacy thing there that would probably be like the nut to crack to enable something like this.
So you're responding with the ethical answer here, which is nice to hear, about like, hey, this is probably not good to do something. Do you think somebody's going to build it? and then not tell customers that this is actually why this thing is so good? And what do you think the impact on the industry's application of generative AI technologies would be if that got found out? Like, hey, this, like, everybody's using this thing because it's so awesome. And then it turns out that somebody leaks the fact that, like, oh yeah, like these agents are talking to each other and it knows everything about you. And it's actually, almost this sociopathic interaction that's happening to get your way because it understands this other person.
These scary ideas, yeah. I would hope that there's some level of checks and balances and scrutiny in place to prevent a product like that from getting into a whole organization. Because you would need to be like networked across the organization to do something like this. There are plenty of products, by the way. I don't know if you guys know, but I guess I'll like break it here, that have zero concern about consent privacy law
Yep.
at all. And they just record everything what they want. And they're breaking laws every day
Mhm.
because California laws are different than Iowa laws, different than New York laws. And they can blindly record like from a browser window and nobody would know. We don't do that very intentionally. We don't want to be a sneaky recorder, but there's products out there that do. So that's already kind of happening in a sense. I think if that were to happen, I mean, that becomes a legal matter, really. That there's probably some privacy laws being broken if that occurs.
Do we protect through privacy laws our like worst self as humans? Like, I think a lot of those privacy laws are generated to protect people's financial identity and stuff. But this is the first time in history where we have the ability to interact with tools and build systems around them that can actually do, some really interesting things with not so much the human mind, but the human emotions, where you can be manipulated by another person but in a way that you would never detect with something like this. Do you think all of the, like, we're co-opting regulations about privacy that are meant to protect people's bank accounts into an area that we don't really understand quite yet, like how powerful it could be?
100%. I mean, we started with the social networks, right? Like they're learning a lot about our behavior. And there was that big scandal in the 2016 election.
Mm-hmm.
I forget what the company I think they were out of Washington, D.C., what the company was called, but they were, I think, the first
Cambridge
to kind of use,
Analytica.
yes,
Yeah.
right? So they were like the forefathers of this type of stuff. It's very effective. And I don't think we have a solid legal framework for this today. And I think you're right. We're co-opting privacy laws that were written for somewhat different purposes. And I think it's very dangerous. I'll add that as well. I think we do need a new codex because, for example, there was the recent arrest of Pavel Durov in France, and they were using like some legal thing to arrest him, but he's a founder of a billion-user company, and he was arrested for potentially being liable for something some user did on this platform. These are also laws that are not correct.
Right. It's kind of chilling. We had all this like fun conversation about like all these cool things, which I don't want to detract from that, because I think how you're approaching this and sort of air gapping that is the model that other companies should use if they want to stay out of international courts. Because even if the laws don't exist today, give it a couple of years, I think it's going to be a knee-jerk reaction to somebody doing something super nefarious. And I think most of the big tech companies don't want to be dragged into that. But some startup is probably going to do it. And the reaction to what they're going to do, whether it's intentional or completely unintentional, they're just like, oh, this would be such a good idea if we could, just make all of this data just readily available between these. look how successful it is. Everybody loves this thing until somebody says, hang on, we have a subpoena. We need to see how you're doing what you're doing. And an expert comes in and it's just like, wait a minute, this is morally corrupt. And then Congress gets involved. So yeah, I think it's something like that is bound to happen. Because there's safeguards that you put on. It was a PR I was working on earlier this week, actually. That was about OpenAI's new API response for basically guardrails detection. And now it directly informs you through a different interface that you just asked a question that I'm not allowed to answer, and I can't give you any information about that. It used to be that was just the response that came back in the REST API, and now it's explicitly in there with a different name, and there's no contextual information on there, in order to make it easier for IT departments to say, hey, who's using these APIs and what are they asking? And why are they asking this? Let's go have a chat with them and see if they still need to be collecting a paycheck here. So it seems like things are moving in that way for that base substrate layer that you're talking about, but it's not that hard to defeat that stuff. Like, there's no way that's foolproof. And it's more like what you're building on top of it that doesn't have that regulation or that control unless you intentionally build that in and design that.
Yeah, a quick question to that front, just really quick. Are you guys fine-tuning models, or is all of this sort of data segmentation coming from context windows or vectors via like a RAG database? Because if you're fine-tuning, I feel like segmenting this could be kind of hard.
We did a lot of R&D with different kinds of models, fine-tuned, raw. And what we've found so far, this might change, but so far we get the best results out of the most powerful foundational models without fine-tuning. And what's really interesting, and I was surprised by this, but in some of our fine-tuning experiments, we're starting to get worse results than we would do with the raw, like powerful foundation model. So I think fine-tuning is probably useful, but in certain specific kinds of use cases. And I think, our world is a world of natural language and like normal, very broad topic conversation. It's and the kinds of results we bring to bear are also very dynamic, let's say. And I think that's, we haven't found a reason to fine-tune a model to give us something better than what we have today. I can see like little things like, task detection or something like that might be fine-tunable, but even there, like super cheap models do a great job now doing that stuff. So why bother investing in a fine-tuned model?
Got it. Okay, cool. I know we're at time, so I'll quickly summarize. Lots of very meta topics. So it was sort of hard to pull out some specific tips or tricks. But some things that stood out to me is when innovating in a socially taboo field, the more companies in the space, the faster that field gets normalized and accepted. So typically there's sort of an inflection point where it's not taboo anymore. On the Sembly side of things, their base is sort of building a digital twin via meeting recordings. And with that information, there's a lot that can be done with it. So in the 2.0 release, they're going to be able to suggest subsequent activities, so effectively JIRA tickets. And then you can also chat with the Sembly agentic framework to build artifacts. And this is just going to get better and better over time. And then finally, keep an eye on the government for what they have to say about data privacy. So Artem, if people want to learn more about you, your work, or Sembly, where should they go?
Check out our website. That's www.sembly.ai. That's SEMBLY.ai. And you can also already check out at the top, there's a page about Semblian 2.0, which has all the new goodies that are really fantastic. And if you want to find me, you can find me on LinkedIn, just Artem Koren on LinkedIn, CPO at Sembly AI. And if you have any questions and want to reach out, I'm happy to connect.
Awesome. Cool. Well, this was a lot of fun. Until next time, it's been Michael Burke and my co-host,
Ben Wilson.
and have a good day, everyone.
We'll catch you next time.